Have you ever noticed how the loudest people in the room are usually the ones doing the least? They've got a plan for everything, an answer for every question, a promise for every problem. Yet when it's time to act, they vanish like smoke. It's almost like talking has become a substitute for doing. We live in a world where saying the right things earns applause, while actually doing the hard work barely gets noticed. Think about it. We post about kindness instead of practicing it. We talk about fitness instead of sweating for it. We dream out loud about success instead of grinding for it. Talking is easy. It costs nothing. Risk nothing, demands nothing. Doing, on the other hand, asks for sweat, sacrifice, and patience. So naturally, most people pick the cheap option. And here's the irony: the more someone talks about what they're going to do, the less likely they are to actually do it. Words become a mask, a performance, a distraction. But underneath all the noise, the truth is simple. Results don't come from what you say. They come from what you do, and often from what you do quietly. People love to talk. Talking is easy, it's comfortable, and it gives the illusion of progress. You can sit in a chair, sip your coffee, and discuss grand ideas about how to save the world without lifting a single finger. And here's the kicker: most people mistake that conversation for accomplishment. The moment someone talks about doing something, their brain rewards them as if they've already done it. That's the gap between saying and doing, the psychological trick where words feel like actions even though they're not. Think about how meetings work. In every office on the planet, you've got a group of people sitting around a table, tossing out ideas, nodding, using buzzwords, drawing arrows on whiteboards, and then walking out of the room like they just built the pyramids. But what really happened? Nothing. No emails sent, no projects completed, no deadlines met. Just words, a lot of words, yet everyone feels productive because they talked about it. That's the talk-action gap. In action, the distance between what sounds like work and what actually is work. This gap shows up everywhere, not just in professional settings. Look at personal life. Someone might say, I'm going to start exercising, I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to write that book. Those sentences come out with so much confidence, as if saying them makes them real. But a week later, the gym shoes are still in the closet, the salad is still in the fridge turning brown, and the book is still a blank page. Why? Because talking is seductive. It tricks you into believing that intention equals execution. It doesn't. Intention without follow-through is just noise. Another part of this gap comes from the way we value appearance over substance. Talking about something signals to others that you care, that you're involved, that you're one of the good people. You don't actually have to do the thing. You just have to sound like you're about to. Someone who tweets about saving the environment gets more applause than the quiet person who recycles every day. The loud voice gets the credit, while the quiet action gets ignored. This is why the gap keeps growing, because society rewards the saying more than the doing. Psychologists call it social reality. When enough people hear you declare your goals, it feels real even if nothing has been achieved. Someone says, I'm launching a business. They get praise, encouragement, admiration. Their dopamine spikes. They haven't made a single sale, but in their mind, they've already succeeded. The problem is, once the brain has enjoyed the reward of talking about it, the urgency to actually do it vanishes. The talk-action gap isn't just laziness, it's biology messing with ambition. Of course, there's also fear hiding behind words. Action means risk. If you say you're going to start a business but never actually do, you'll never fail. If you talk about writing a book but never start, you'll never face rejection. Words create a safety net. They give you the identity without the vulnerability. You can wear the mask of the motivated person without facing the reality that you might not succeed. That's why people camp out in the land of talk. It's safe, it's flattering, and it's free. The irony is, the more someone talks, the less likely they are to act. It's almost like a law of nature. The person constantly announcing their plans rarely delivers, while the person who quietly works often surprises everyone when the results show up. The gap widens the louder the talking gets. And if you listen closely, you can usually tell who's serious. The ones drowning you in details about what they're going to do are stalling. The ones saying very little are busy shrinking the gap between word and deed. We live in an age where silence has become suspicious. If you're not constantly broadcasting your opinions, updates, and feelings, people think something's wrong with you. Modern life has turned into a giant megaphone, and everyone feels compelled to shout into it. Social media is the perfect example of this phenomenon. Platforms designed to connect us have instead created a constant stream of chatter, most of which has no weight, no depth, and no lasting value. It's not communication, it's noise. And what makes it worse is that the more noise there is, the less action you see. People have convinced themselves that their digital noise is a form of action, when in reality, it's the opposite. It's the distraction from action. Take the way activism operates online. Once upon a time, if you believed in a cause, you had to get up, organize, march, donate, volunteer, or sacrifice something real. Now, people slap a hashtag on their post, change their profile picture, or share a trending slogan, and they walk away feeling like heroes. It's activism without the action. It's a digital badge of moral superiority that costs nothing, demands nothing, and achieves almost nothing. The person posting believes they've contributed, but the world remains the same. This is modern noise, loud declarations that echo in digital chambers but don't touch reality. The same applies to personal goals. People love to post about their dreams and ambitions. They'll announce they're starting a business, going on a fitness journey, or writing a book. Their followers cheer, like comment with fire emojis, and for a moment, it feels like something real is happening. But weeks later, nothing has changed. The business never launched, the gym membership was never used, the book never got a first chapter. Why? Because the public declaration satisfied the need for recognition without the grind of work. Modern noise fills the space where real effort should live. It's easier to talk about a dream than to live it, and in a world built on likes and shares, talking about it already earns you the applause you crave. The other problem with modern noise is that it spreads distraction. When everyone is talking at once, it becomes harder to figure out what actually matters. People are overwhelmed with opinions, rants, threads, and videos, each demanding attention. The important issues, the meaningful actions, get buried under a mountain of chatter. Everyone's busy scrolling, reacting, and debating, but almost nobody's moving the needle forward. It's like sitting in traffic. So many cars on the road, engines running, horns blaring, but nobody's getting anywhere. The constant noise gives the illusion of motion but delivers stagnation. There's also the ego element at play. Modern noise isn't really about ideas, it's about identity. People don't post or rant to solve problems, they do it to show others what kind of person they are. The goal is not progress, it's performance. A post about climate change is less about saving the planet and more about being seen as the kind of person who cares about the planet. A rant about politics is less about fixing the system and more about proving which team you belong to. The actual issues get lost because the real focus is on self-presentation. Noise replaces substance, performance replaces purpose, and nobody notices because the volume is so high. And the cruel irony is that modern noise is addictive. Platforms are designed to reward noise with attention. The more noise you make, the more likes and comments you get, and the more compelled you feel to keep making it. It becomes a loop of empty output. Meanwhile, action requires patience, effort, and often goes unnoticed for long stretches of time. Planting a tree, saving money, building a business. These things are slow, invisible processes. They don't generate instant applause. So people gravitate toward the noise because it delivers the dopamine immediately. The result is a culture where people would rather be seen doing something than actually do it. Ego is one of the biggest drivers of why people talk more than they act. At its core, talking satisfies the ego far more quickly and conveniently than doing ever could. Action requires patience, sacrifice, and the possibility of failure. Talking, on the other hand, offers immediate gratification. The moment someone declares their intentions, shares their opinions, or announces their plans, the ego gets its reward. The applause, the nods, the validation. All of that feeds the self-image. It makes people feel powerful, competent, even heroic without requiring them to follow through. That's why ego often takes precedence over substance. Words polish the mirror the ego stares into, while action forces the ego to face reality. In today's world, the ego has endless platforms to broadcast itself. Social media acts like a stage where everyone is the star of their own performance. People present themselves not as they are, but as they want to be seen. They create a version of themselves that exists purely in words and images, carefully curated to impress others. They'll say, I'm starting a new venture, or I believe deeply in this cause, not necessarily because they're committed, but because it makes them appear visionary, compassionate, or enlightened. Substance is secondary. The ego doesn't care whether the venture succeeds or the cause is served. What matters is the perception of greatness, not greatness itself. This ego-driven preference for talk over action also explains why people love to give advice they don't follow. The person who never exercises has endless tips on fitness. The person drowning in debt can talk for hours about financial wisdom. The ego thrives on the illusion of authority, and speaking with confidence gives that illusion to both the speaker and the audience. But once it comes to practicing that advice, the ego loses interest because practice reveals flaws and inconsistencies. Talking hides imperfections, action exposes them. And the ego will always choose the easier route. Another layer to this is the way ego inflates importance through speech. Talking makes people feel significant. When someone gives a long speech at work, when they dominate a conversation, when they lecture about morality or politics, what they're really saying is, look at me, listen to me, I matter. Whether their words have value is almost irrelevant. The act of taking up space, of being the center of attention, satisfies the ego in a way that quiet, behind-the-scenes work never. Substance doesn't always get noticed. But ego can't survive without notice, so it chases the visible even if the visible is hollow. The ego also loves control, and talking provides a sense of control that action doesn't. When you talk about something, you control the narrative. You decide how you're perceived, how the story unfolds, how impressive you sound. When you act, however, outcomes are uncertain. You could fail. You could be criticized, or you could realize you weren't as capable as you thought. That unpredictability terrifies the ego. Talking lets you script a perfect version of yourself. While doing forces you to face the raw and filtered truth. Ego prefers the script. What makes this imbalance worse is that other people often play along. Society rewards talkers. A person who speaks well, who dazzles with words, is admired even if their actions don't back it up. Leaders who make grand promises get elected. Influencers who talk about success sell courses. And speakers who inspire with lofty ideals fill stadiums. The ego learns quickly that substance isn't required for recognition. Words alone are enough to maintain the illusion of greatness. And once the ego realizes it can achieve status with words, why bother with the grind of action? This is why ego over substance becomes such a trap. It's not just laziness. It's not just fear. It's the very structure of human pride. Talking allows someone to construct a perfect image of themselves and feed their ego with constant validation, while action threatens to dismantle that image with messy reality. Words build a throne, but deeds demand work. And given the choice, most people let the ego rule and settle comfortably in the kingdom of talk. One of the most overlooked reasons people talk endlessly without doing much is that talking itself becomes a distraction from action. Words are not just filler, they function as a shield against the uncomfortable demands of actually following through. When someone spends hours discussing what needs to be done, they create the illusion of productivity. They convince themselves that by analyzing, planning, or debating, they're already halfway there. In reality, nothing has moved forward. The talking is simply a stall. A clever diversion from the harder, riskier, and more uncertain act of doing. It feels safe, it feels active, but it's just a well-dressed form of procrastination. This distraction tactic shows up clearly in group dynamics. Imagine a committee or a team project. People gather around and the conversation flows with energy. Everyone has ideas. Everyone wants to share their perspective, and the discussion goes in circles for hours. At the end, there's a sense of relief. We've accomplished something today. But if you look closely, the only thing accomplished was filling time with noise. No decisions made, no steps taken, just verbal gymnastics. The act of talking distracts from the fact that no one is committed to rolling up their sleeves and doing the work. It's easier to stay in the comfort of theory than to step into the discomfort of execution. On a personal level, people use talk as a way to distract themselves from their own lack of discipline. Someone might keep announcing their plans to eat healthier or start a new project, not because they're closer to doing it, but because the repetition of words allows them to avoid facing their inaction. It's almost like a ritual. Say it often enough, and it feels like progress. The real purpose isn't to act, it's to keep the mind busy with the fantasy of action so that the absence of real effort doesn't sting as much. Talking becomes a self-soothing strategy, a way to cover up the uncomfortable silence where action should be. The tactic also works as a way to deflect accountability. If a leader, for instance, makes big speeches about what will be done, the focus shifts to the speech itself rather than the results. People are distracted by the passion, the words, the performance, and they stop questioning the lack of tangible progress. It's the classic trick of substituting noise for results. The more people talk about what they're going to do, the less others notice that nothing is actually being done. Words distract both the speaker and the audience from the emptiness underneath. This is why you see so many long-winded promises in politics, in corporate announcements, even in everyday conversations. Talking provides a smokescreen that hides inaction. Another part of the distraction is the feeling of control that words provide. Life is unpredictable and real action involves uncertainty. By talking, people can create neat little plans, polished narratives, and hypothetical scenarios where everything seems manageable. They distract themselves from the uncontrollable messness of real life. It's easier to spend an evening describing how a project will unfold than to deal with the messy first steps of actually starting it. Words create a tidy version of reality, and that version becomes a comfortable place to hide. Even when action does eventually happen, the constant talking beforehand can water it down. People overanalyze, overplan, and overdiscuss until the energy to act has evaporated. The distraction tactic drains momentum. By the time it's necessary to do something, the fire has burned out, replaced by exhaustion from too much talk. It's the paradox of preparation. Instead of fueling action, the endless discussion replaces it. People become experts at the plan, but amateurs at the execution. The words distracted them so thoroughly that when the time came to act, there was nothing left in the tank. And at the root of it all, talking as a distraction is comfortable. It's easier to hide in words than to risk failure in deeds. Talking distracts us from our fear of being judged, our fear of falling short, our fear of not living up to the image we've projected. As long as we keep talking, we don't have to face those fears directly. The words are a buffer, a cushion, a way to stay busy without being brave. Silence is often underestimated in a world addicted to noise. People assume that to matter, you must speak, post, argue, and constantly make yourself heard. But silence has a different kind of power, one rooted in action rather than performance. When someone chooses silence, they aren't necessarily absent. They might be present in the most meaningful way by focusing on what needs to be done rather than what needs to be said. The value of silence lies in its ability to shift energy away from appearances and toward results. It creates space for thought, concentration, and execution while noise scatters attention and wastes momentum. The quiet worker is the one who often surprises everyone when results appear because they weren't broadcasting every step of the way. While others were busy making declarations, updates, and promises, the silent one was building, practicing, refining. Silence removes the pressure performance. It allows people to work without the constant gaze of an audience, free from the temptation to exaggerate progress or dramatize effort. Instead of worrying about how their work looks, they can focus entirely on how their work functions. In silence, intention turns into action because there's nothing to interrupt or dilute it. Silence also guards against the trap of overpromising. Once words are out in the world, they create expectations, and expectations can weigh down the process. Talking about what you will do gives people the chance to praise you prematurely or doubt you unfairly. Either way, it interferes with the natural rhythm of progress. But when you choose silence, you keep your goals private and protect them from outside noise. You build without interference, and the results speak louder than anything you could have said. That's why the old saying rings true, let your success make the noise. Until then, silence is the safest and strongest companion of action. The value of silence also extends to the way it shapes perception. When someone rarely talks about what they're doing, their actions stand out even more. A person who constantly announces their efforts risks dulling the impact, but someone who moves quietly commands respect because what they produce feels genuine and unforced. Silence creates a sense of mystery and seriousness. It suggests focus, discipline, and substance. Words can be inflated, exaggerated, or twisted, but results are undeniable. By holding back speech, silence makes action more credible. There's also a mental clarity that comes with silence. When you aren't busy talking about what you're going to do, you save that energy for the work itself. Talking can drain motivation because it tricks the mind into thinking progress has been made. Silence avoids that trap. It channels thought inward, keeping ambition sharp and unspent until it transforms into movement. In this way, silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's a reservoir of power. It concentrates effort instead of dispersing it. In a noisy culture, silence itself becomes a kind of rebellion. It pushes back against the expectation that everyone must constantly share, update, and announce. Choosing silence is choosing depth over surface, substance over appearance. It signals that you don't need external validation to keep going. You don't need to convince anyone else you're working, because the work itself will show. This independence is rare in a time when so much energy is wasted proving rather than doing. Silence offers freedom from that cycle, and perhaps the greatest value of silence is that it aligns more closely with reality. Words are representations. They can distort, exaggerate, or mislead. Silence leaves no room for that. When someone is silent, the only proof of their effort comes from what they actually deliver. That honesty, that simplicity makes silence the most reliable measure of intention. You can't hide behind words when you haven't spoken them. All that remains is the truth of what you've done. The gap between what people say and what they actually do often reveals hypocrisy, and this hypocrisy becomes more obvious the more someone talks. People like to present an image of themselves that doesn't quite line up with their behavior, and words are the easiest way to create that image. Talking allows someone to wear the costume of virtue, intelligence, or discipline without paying the cost of living up to it. This is why the loudest voices preaching values are often the ones breaking those values in private. The hypocrisy factor thrives on this imbalance between speech and action. Think of how common it is for people to give advice they don't follow. A person who talks endlessly about health might be the one sneaking fast food at night. Someone who lectures about honesty might be lying to themselves and others every day. The act of talking loudly about a principle becomes a way to cover the fact that the principle isn't being practiced. Hypocrisy grows in that gap because people are more concerned with being seen as good than with doing the work of actually being good. Talking loudly provides the appearance. Living it quietly requires discipline. Most settle for the easier option. This pattern is especially clear in leaders. Politicians are famous for making sweeping promises about justice, equality, progress, or reform. Their speeches are polished, emotional, and inspiring, but once the lights fade and the work begins, many of those promises dissolve into excuses or half measures. The same voice that thundered about change becomes strangely quiet when change demands sacrifice. Hypocrisy here isn't just personal, it's systemic. Leaders rely on words to gain trust, but without consistent action, the words become lies dressed up as hope. The hypocrisy factor turns language into a performance where sincerity is measured by volume instead of consistency. But hypocrisy isn't limited to grand figures. It shows up in everyday life. People talk about values, hard work, loyalty, kindness, but when tested, they often act in the opposite way. Someone might post endlessly about compassion, but treat people around them with impatience or cruelty. Another might insist on discipline and ambition while spending most of their time procrastinating. The louder the declarations, the bigger the suspicion that they're compensating for a lack of follow-through. Hypocrisy hides best behind noise, because noise distracts from the absence of proof. At a deeper level, this hypocrisy comes from a conflict between identity and behavior. People want to be seen as the kind of person who believes in certain things, But they don't always want to live the hard reality of those beliefs. Talking about justice makes someone feel like a just person, even if their actions don't support it. Talking about discipline makes them feel disciplined, even if their daily routine proves otherwise. The hypocrisy factor grows out of that psychological shortcut the brain accepts the words as reality, even when behavior contradicts them. Over time, people convince themselves they are what they say, not what they do. What makes this form of hypocrisy especially damaging is how contagious it is. When others see people praise for their words rather than their deeds, they begin to copy the pattern. If society applauds someone for posting about generosity rather than practicing it, soon everyone is performing generosity instead of living it. Hypocrisy becomes a cultural habit where appearances are rewarded and action is optional. The cycle reinforces itself because real action is hard and often invisible, while loud talk is easy and instantly validated. And yet, hypocrisy has a way of revealing itself. Words eventually meet the test of time. The person who talks endlessly about their values but never practices them will be exposed because results cannot be faked indefinitely. Hypocrisy survives in the short term but collapses under the weight of consistency. The hypocrisy factor highlights the danger of relying on words without action. They create a fragile image that crumbles the moment reality demands proof. So what's the lesson here? Talking feels productive, it boosts the ego, it distracts us, and sometimes it even hides hypocrisy. But at the end of the day, words without action are empty. They are echoes in an empty room, applause for effort that was never made, promises that vanish as soon as they're spoken. Silence, focus, and quiet action carry far more weight than endless declarations. If you want to make a real difference, whether in your work, your relationships, or your own life, stop measuring yourself by how loudly you talk or how impressively you promise. Start measuring yourself by what you actually do. The world doesn't need more words. It needs deeds. The ones who succeed, the ones who change things, the ones who are remembered, they rarely shout about their plans. They act, they endure, and they let their results speak louder than any speech ever could. Because at the end of the day, the more you say, the less you do. But the less you say, the more you accomplish.